you very much, Jamie. Um, well, let's begin with a moment of reflection. Please join me in Gassho. From the Shoshinge, the light of the Buddha's purity is without compare. When a person encounters this light, all bounds of karma fall away. So let us take refuge in Amida, the Buddha of infinite light and life. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Good morning, everyone. I think you can see the picture of myself with Reverend Umezu, and we are trying to convert 3 geishas to become Jodo Shinshu members. This was one of our BCA education tours in Kyoto, and we had the chance to meet these geishas, and it's a funny story. Before I begin, I think maybe you know the story of Shinran being exiled. And one of the reasons that he got exiled was Honen Shonin, Shinran's teacher, and some of the other disciples of Honen were friendly with some courtesan ladies that were part of the emperor's entourage. And they used that as an excuse to, one of the excuses to ban Honen and Shinran, to exile them. And so I hope Reverend Umezu and myself won't be exiled because of our association with these Kyoto geisha. But thank you very much for inviting me to join with you for the last service of this year. It's hard to believe that. It's another year has gone by, and it's certainly probably been a very, very unique one beyond anyone's wildest imagination. Almost every aspect of our human existence has been affected by this thing we call coronavirus 19. Perhaps some of you are in the science field or medical field, and so you're familiar with what a virus is, but I wasn't really sure what a virus is, and so I looked it up online, and it says viruses are not living things. Viruses are complicated assemblies of molecules, including proteins, nucleic acids, lipids, and carbohydrates. But on their own, they can do nothing until they enter a living cell. Without cells, viruses would not be able to multiply. Therefore, viruses are not considered living things. So just how is it that something that's not even considered living, or something that doesn't even have a brain, could threaten the very existence and survival of humankind in the 21st century? Perhaps, I think, maybe we humans were becoming too comfortable, and we neglected to acknowledge the reality of change, that we live in an ever-changing world. So it took a pandemic to wake us up. And boy, has this wake-up call been especially hard for many of us to accept. It's our foolish views of ourselves and our existence that created the false world that we live in, an unreal dream world. And it took this COVID pandemic to wake us up. I hear so often people say that they want the world and their lives to go back to the way things were before the pandemic. But in the constant evolvement of reality and the course of change, we Buddhists know that the world will never return to the world we were before this pandemic. The Buddha talked so much about change, and he knew how much humans hated change. Boy, I can attest to that. But as I said earlier, it's amazing how one small, minuscule virus has affected and changed almost every aspect of our human civilization. Perhaps we humans are being told something by Mother Nature. Perhaps it's time that we look at how we exist and live on this planet. Speaking of change, how many of you have started thinking about your New Year's resolutions to make in a few weeks again? Through the years, I've probably made 50 or 60 resolutions, but I don't think any of them have ever been accomplished or attained. We make resolutions and promises to eat better or to eat less. We promise ourselves to study harder or to even read one book a month. Probably one of the most frequently made resolutions we all make is to exercise more. Some people make resolutions to be kinder or to save money, to spend less. And many of us make resolutions to listen to the Dharma more or to even attend church more regularly. These annual New Year's resolutions are so easy to make, but to change our lifestyles, to extinguish some of our desires and our egos is so hard, if not impossible, to accomplish. Typically, I break my New Year's resolutions within a few hours of the new year. But I guess even this annual breaking of my resolution is a form of change. Shakyamuni often addressed the topic of change and the suffering that it created for us. Change, change, change. We hear so much about change. But the only things that don't change in this existence are change itself, as well as my continued foolish existence that I live every day. And most fortunately for us, the eternal and limitless embrace of Namo Amida Butsu. A few days ago, I got a phone call from one of my temple friends who wanted to get together for dinner. Because of COVID, we hadn't gotten together for a long, long time. So we got together for dinner, and I sat there the whole night listening to their conversation, complaining about friends, family, and neighbors all night long. I guess being cooped up in their house for the past 3 years really created a lot of frustration, and they had a lot of time to think about the imperfections of others in their lives. I had to sit there listening to complaint after complaint, and I was amazed that one of their complaints was how they would send emails to our friends during the pandemic, but some of the friends never even took the time to acknowledge them writing to them. When I heard this complaint, it made me laugh inside, because this couple that I had met with is well known amongst our friends for never responding back to text messages when they're invited to dinners or get-togethers. Just as the Dharma teaches us, it's so easy to see the faults of others, but so hard to find one small fault of oneself. From time to time, I think about that question. Do I have any faults? Let's take a moment right now. Offhand, Can you think of any fault of your own right now at this very moment? If you're like me, I can't think of a single fault of my own right now. I am perfect. My ego assures me that I am the next most perfect person after the Buddha. Isn't it amazing what kind of illusory world my ego is capable of creating and making me believe? However, because I am a hopeless and foolish being, I am grateful that the Buddha is always watching over me, and I am fortunate to receive constant reminders and lessons from the Buddha. The other day, as I was coming home from Chicago and I was at the O'Hare Airport, I saw a small refrigerator magnet with this message, this teaching. And I'm sure that the Buddha sent this message specifically to me at that moment. The magnet read, "It is better to let people think you are a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt." When I read this magnet, it cracked me up, and I started laughing as I was standing there at the counter. Simple teaching. It is better to let people think you are a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. I am sure that the Buddha sent this message specifically for me. You may wonder who said this saying, and actually it was Mark Twain. I actually follow Mark Twain's sayings and his words of wisdom. But how many times have we seen people, or even ourselves, open our mouths and say things that we shouldn't have said? Maybe this would be a good New Year's resolution for me. It is better to let people think you are a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. It's holiday time, and I'm sure everyone is busy buying and wrapping gifts for your little angels. But it amazes me in my conversations with friends that I find some parents who are so critical of others' children while heaping praise after praise upon their own children, having the illusion that they did such a terrific job of parenting. It's as if they raised the only perfect angels in the world. I have a friend whose son is an outright crook. He's a thief and a swindler. Yet the father always praises his son for his ingenuity and creativeness. This crook, this wonderful son, has actually swindled thousands and thousands of dollars from unsuspecting friends of the father. And yet the father can't see the reality that his son is a thief. In Japanese, there's a saying, oya baka. Oya means parents. And of course, most of us know the meaning of baka, which means fool. The term oya baka refers to the blind ignorance of parents thinking that their children are perfect and believing that their children can do no wrong. But in our Jodo Shinshu tradition, the word I just used for parent, oya, is also a reference to Amida Buddha, who is our spiritual parent. Whereas parents consumed by oyabaka cannot see the truth and only see their children as perfect, our spiritual Oyasama, the Amida Buddha, can see us as we truly are, and he accepts us for all our faults and even all our oyabaka false praise and foolishness we heap on others. Taking life's adventure with a grain of salt and realizing the foolish nature and limited capabilities of each of us, I think it is good to periodically laugh at ourselves, our ignorances, and to remind ourselves of our few and probably many shortcomings. When I was a small child, many years ago, I was able to spend a lot of time with my obachan, my grandma. And I remember she would get up at the crack of dawn every morning of the year to put on a pot of rice. And then she would put rice on the altar and then chant a sutra every morning. When we stayed over her house, she would wake us up, get us out of bed, and we'd all sit in front of the Obutsudan altar, still half asleep. And we'd put our hands together in gasho and recite Namo Amida Butsu with Obachan, with grandma. And then after this morning ritual, we would usually have breakfast. And then we would go out to tend to her vegetables. But before we started to work in the vegetable field, she would always have us turn to the sun, place our hands together in gasho, and recite Namo Amida Butsu to the sun. She explained to us that just as the sun is the source of all life on earth, the Amida Buddha is the source of our life as well. So when we see the sun each morning, we are also seeing Amida, and we should express our gratitude to Amida with Namo Amida Butsu. Even today, almost 70 years later, I'm still reminded each morning when I see the sun of my obachan's lesson to me. My grandma would grow a variety of vegetables and flowers throughout the year. And at the beginning of each growing season, we would search each morning for the first vegetable that was getting ready to become ripe. Day by day, we watched each vegetable and each flower bud as they were getting ready to become ripe. And then when the first vegetable was ripe, or the budding flower was ready to bloom, we would take that first ripe tomato or cucumber or eggplant or flower and place it on the altar and thank the Buddha for the countless karmic conditions which made these delicious vegetables and the beautiful flowers possible. My obachan, my grandma, placed everything she grew and anything she received always on the altar first. And then she would place her hands together in gasho as an expression of gratitude. My grandmother, like most first-generation Issei immigrants to America, had no more than an elementary school education, if that. But she lived with Namo Amida Butsu 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. Namo Amida Butsu was her foundation, her strength, and her lifeblood. Most certainly, this COVID pandemic has thrown our world and all of humanity a curveball like we've never seen during our lifetime. COVID has created changes beyond our wildest expectations. How we eat, how we communicate, how we work, how we shop, and even how we share and receive the Dharma has all changed due to this virus without a brain. And despite all the sadness, the death, the economic and social challenges brought about by this pandemic, I hope this pandemic has given us a new sense of appreciation and gratitude for even the simple and obvious things which make our life possible. Do you remember at the beginning of the pandemic how there was a run on toilet paper? How could the world's greatest and richest nation run out of toilet paper? But it's a funny thing that before the pandemic, it never even crossed my mind about the person at the toilet paper factory who ran the presses that makes the soft toilet tissue for my rear end. Or what about the countless trees it takes to make one roll of toilet paper for each of us in this world? Certainly, this pandemic has opened our eyes to so much. For those of you in Twin Cities, you probably, well, I think you are freezing right now. And it's a balmy, probably 50 here in California this morning. But it's actually turning out to be a rare winter for us because we're actually getting some rain this year. For those of you who may not know California, it typically only rains during the winter and through early spring. So we only get rain from October through maybe early April, if we're lucky. Otherwise, most of California is a desert. Last winter, it started raining in the fall, but by January, it stopped. And so we only had 2 months of rain this year. I'm sure all of you see how California burns and burns during the summer when we have our fire season. Millions of acres, hundreds of homes, and whole towns have been consumed by fire in California these last few years. But this year, we escaped a major fire season. One of my friends said, maybe it's because there's nothing left to burn anymore in California. Everything's already burned down. California, I'm sure those of you who have visited here will admit that it is a beautiful state. We have the mountains on the east side. We have the beautiful Pacific Ocean on the west side. We have some of the most magnificent national parks like Yosemite and Sequoia. But many beautiful trees and plants that have existed for centuries and that had become accustomed to surviving on little water have reached their limit and died. In our homes, besides not flushing the toilet after each use, we also have to cut back on washing dishes and our clothes. We can't water our lawns or gardens, nor can we wash our cars at home. But isn't it a karmic coincidence that we Californians have a big shortage of water, and yet we sit on the edge of the world's largest body of water, the Pacific Ocean? But what's even stranger is that with global warming and the melting of the polar ice cap, it's predicted that the Pacific Ocean sea level will rise at least by 6 inches, 6 inches by 2030. That's only 7 years away, and the ocean will rise 6 inches. By 2100, they're predicting the sea level could be 7 feet higher than it is right now. This means that most of California's coastline and our major cities like San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, Los Angeles, and San Diego will be underwater in the not too distant future. So it's ironically karmic that while we have less and less drinking water and consumable water, the Pacific Ocean is going to rise 6 inches in less than 8 years. I have to bow my head in gratitude for every drop of rain and snow falling on California this winter. Earlier this morning, as I was getting dressed, I heard the classic Bee Gees song, How Deep Is Your Love? And I love the lyrics of this song because it includes the words, living in a world of fools. I would have hoped that in the 26 centuries, since the time of Shakyamuni Buddha, that our world had come to realize mankind's foolishness and the 3 poisons. But in the words and teachings of Shinran Shonin, we are all foolish beings. We can send people to the moon. We can find cures for some illnesses. And now we even have driverless cars. But are we still such foolish beings that we continue to refuse to acknowledge the limitations of our natural resources and how we humans are the ones causing the destruction of this world? I'd like to hear an explanation of how 40 million Californians are expected to survive with no water. Are we humans really that foolish? As we come to the end of this year, it's so easy for us to think, I've made it through another year due to my own efforts and sacrifices. But when you look at the reality of our existence, it is only due to countless karmic encounters, sacrifices, efforts, energy, sweat, and toil of countless others that we are here today at this very moment. In Japanese, when asked, "Oh, how are you doing?" the typical response begins with the words, "Okage-sama de." But most people say "Okage-sama de" as a matter of fact, and really don't think about the meaning or the idea of this phrase. Okage-sama de means or implies thanks to you and countless unseen conditions which have embraced me, I am here at this moment. What a beautiful and heartfelt expression of gratitude in its truest sense. And so, as we come to the end of this year, I hope we can think about all the Okage-sama des that we have. Okage-sama de to Siddhartha Gautama, who attained Buddhahood 2,600 years ago and brought the light of truth to our darkened world. Secondly, Okage-sama de, we have survived this pandemic thus far because of the unseen kindness, sacrifices, energies, compassion, and selflessness of so many others. Okage-sama de, I am allowed to continue to exist in this world through the countless and innumerable forms of life and existence that enable me to live at this moment. Okage-sama de means thank you, Buddha, for constantly watching over me, even though I do foolish things, even though I am hopeless, ignorant, ego-filled, and evil. Thank you for never leaving my side. Through timeless time and the flow of my beginningless existence, I now realize how lucky I've been to be embraced by the Buddha. Okage-sama de, how lucky we are to receive the Buddha Dharma that embraces all of us. In the course of our human life, we have all experienced happy, fulfilling, and awakening times, and we've also experienced suffering, sadness, hurt, and ignorance. But it's these causes that has enabled us to be blessed with the greatest gift of Namo Amida Butsu. There are innumerable paths to the ultimate truth of enlightenment, but how lucky each of us are to have come encountered with the Buddha's great promise of Namo Amida Butsu. In the words of Renyo Shonin, let us realize the truth he shared with us, that indeed we may have radiant health in the morning, but by evening we may be no more than white ashes. Each moment of life is indeed a blessing, a gift of Namo Amida Butsu. And finally, Okage-sama de, I hope each of you will enjoy a wonderful holiday season and New Year's together with Namo Amida Butsu. May the year of the rabbit be filled with continued good health, happiness, and awakening in Namo Amida Butsu. Thank you. Happy New Year. Please take care. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu.